We're looking live again at Washington, and still, after that big diplomatic push yesterday, the leaders of Canada's 3 northern territories are going to be holding a panel in Washington later on today. A discussion about security and economic opportunity, unique to Canada's north, but they'll also be looking at the diplomatic role leaders in the north can play when it comes to relations between Canada and the United States and any possible threats to the region. So the panel discussion gets underway at 9:30 a.m. Eastern. We're going to listen in and be bringing you coverage from that. 9:30 a.m. Eastern. It's at the Wilson Center in Washington. And representing the Wilson Center, in fact, the Canada Institute at the Wilson Center, my special guest this morning is Xavier Delgado, Senior Program Associate. And good morning. Welcome to our program.
Good early morning. Thank you for having me, Heather.
It is early morning, but we have lots to discuss and important matters ahead of us today, Xavier. First of all, you're going to be attending this Northern Premiers panel. What are you expecting will be the gist of the conversation there?
Well, I think it's worth noting this is on the back end of their trip here in Washington. They've engaged in a ton of meetings while they've been in town, not just with legislators and industry leaders like they'd originally expected, but they actually managed to secure a meeting with senior White House officials yesterday, which came very last minute. So I expect that they'll give a readout from some of those meetings, but more importantly, talk about some of the vectors of alignment between Canada and the United States and the High North. I know it's a priority for the U.S. administration, for the White House, and for a lot of people in Congress. So talking about how Canada and the U.S. can cooperate on some Arctic priorities is going to be a critical message at the event today.
Well, that's indeed what they're suggesting will be the focus, the prospects for collaboration between Canada and the U.S. in the Arctic. Xavier, what do you see as the possible collaborations there?
Well, I think there's 2 main fronts, Heather. There's security, which is a big one. Of course, right before the Super Bowl, the president was on TV complaining about Chinese and Russian ships sailing through the Canadian Arctic. So we know he's got an eye to Arctic security, especially Canada's role in it. It conveys the premiers need to convey a seriousness about taking those concerns to heart. The senior White House officials yesterday said, take the president at his word in reference to his concerns about fentanyl. I think we should also be taking his word to heart and his concerns to heart when it comes to Arctic security and NATO 2% defense spending. It's been a major issue for previous U.S. administrations. This current administration is no exception. The other side of things is the economic side, and the North has a ton of critical minerals deposits. The U.S. actually currently invests in those through the Pentagon's Defense Production Act program. I think about $15 million US right now being sent to Canadian critical minerals projects. That can be a major part of collaboration, creating a secure supply chain for critical minerals, especially as the U.S. tries to wean off of Chinese supply.
Okay. But in terms of collaboration, I mean, it raises a bit of a question for me, the notion of collaboration I can see, but given what we're hearing, particularly, the expansionist rhetoric, the hard line the president is taking with Canada, Canadian control over lands and waters in the Arctic has always been, it's been accepted. It's been a given at a certain point. Do you foresee, given what we're hearing from the White House right now, Donald Trump challenging that?
No, I don't think anything beyond what we've seen from previous administrations, Heather. I think it's worth noting that the U.S. considers the Northwest Passage an international waterway. It's long considered it an international waterway, whereas Canada has considered it its own internal territorial waters. That's a longstanding dispute. I don't see the Trump administration taking a different approach or a different stance on that issue from its predecessors. But I don't think we're going to see any clashes over territory beyond what we've seen in the past. What I think we might see is the U.S. trying to support its own domestic industry and its own domestic security. What's critical for the Northern Premiers to communicate is that Canada can be a strengthener in that regard, as opposed to just a laggard on any of the other aspects of this relationship. Not a country that's weakening U.S. economic interests, not a country that's just taking advantage of U.S. security providers, but actually adding to U.S. strength in the continent.
And protecting northern security with some of the assets that Canada already has. I just want to bring up pictures for our viewers, because I don't know if we'll hear anything about it, but there has been a lot of discussion about Canada's Harry DeWolf class Arctic and offshore patrol ships, which Canada has, which are unique assets, which could be valuable and maybe, again, important to reassuring the United States about northern security. What do you think about that aspect?
I think it's critical. Canada has to leverage every unique asset that it has. It also has to look towards the long-term future. One of the most exciting parts of the Canada-U.S. security partnership right now is the ICE Pact, the icebreaker collaboration effort between Canada, the U.S., and Finland to build more icebreaking assets. The U.S. icebreaker fleet is not large right now, and certainly as China and Russia and other geopolitical competitors are trying to increase their presence in the Arctic, this is a welcome effort from the two countries to collaborate. I think one of the critical pieces of this, Heather, is that security can't just be a drive through or a sail through the Northwest Passage every now and again. It has to be a sustained effort for it to be effective. And the only way to do that, if you're Canada and the United States, is to work together, not just with each other, but by engaging local populations, building dual use infrastructure in the North, and really building the capacity to sustain a greater presence in the Arctic.
So even as we hear potentially, Xavier, today, the northern premiers talking about how their region can be an asset to the United States in terms of security and economic interest. I'm wondering what your thoughts are as well, whether they'll focus on Canada and the imperative to shore up Canada's own interests in that region to protect Canada's Arctic sovereignty and security as well. Should that be sort of a dual thrust at this time?
Absolutely, and I don't think the U.S. would expect anything less. When Canada is strong in the Arctic, the U.S. is also strong in the Arctic. It's part of that dynamic of being friends, partners, and allies. I think the White House would welcome greater Canadian security investments and defense investments in the Arctic region. They'd also welcome, once those security measures are in place, greater collaboration between their own assets in Alaska and other regions of the U.S. North.
I'm glad you got up early for us, Xavier. Thank you very much, because you've really helped us understand some of these issues so well, and we'll look ahead to that 9:30 news conference and panel discussion with a lot more information this morning. Thank you for your time and expertise, Xavier Delgado.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.